Sonnet 130, or My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, by William Shakespeare, was published in 1609. It forms part of a sequence of 154 sonnets, the first 126 of which were addressed to the fair youth, while sonnets 127 to 152 were addressed to the unnamed dark lady. So called because Shakespeare describes her eyes as raven black, her hair as black wires, and her skin as dun or brown. We still don't know her identity. There has been speculation by Shakespearean scholars that she may have been of Mediterranean or African descent. Or she may even have been just a creation of Shakespeare's imagination. The sonnet sequence focuses on the love Shakespeare's poetic persona has for these two figures, although his feelings for the fair youth are strictly platonic, while his love for the dark lady is overtly sexual. Sonnets enjoyed a golden age in England during the Elizabethan era, after their introduction by Thomas Wyatt in the 1550s. Love was the theme of many of them, and a popular subject was the description of a loved one's physical beauty through comparisons to things found in nature and heaven. This listing, or cataloguing, of a usually female subject's physical attributes is known as blazon. This overly enthusiastic praise, often straying into the realms of hyperbole, of an idealised female beauty, which was stereotypically blonde-haired, blue-eyed and pale-complexioned, was considered, however, even by the time Shakespeare was writing, to be rather cliched, or in other words, overused and unoriginal. The poem itself is likely to be a parody of a sonnet sequence of 1596 called Diella by the poet Richard Lynch, as a number of Lynch's images and vocabulary choices from the third poem of the sequence crop up in Shakespeare's sonnet. Lynch refers to his mistress's snow-white skin, her hair which exceeds gold forced in smallest wire, her eyes which dart fire more glorious to behold than midday sun, her ivory front, or the paleness of her décolletage, and her cheeks which are like ripe cherries laid in milk. Lynch characterises his mistress as an unattainable, chaste goddess, with words like ivory and alabaster, evoking a lifeless carving or statue which has been created to be worshipped from afar. Shakespeare also employs the literary device of blazon, comparing the physical attributes of his dark lady to things found in nature and heaven. Each time, however, that she is measured up against them, she is found to be lacking. But rather than a picture of the impossibly ideal pale and fair beauty which Shakespeare makes clear does not exist in the first place, we are faced with a realistic portrayal of a woman whose convention-shattering beauty is just as extraordinary, in Shakespeare's opinion, as any other woman's which has been grossly exaggerated in verse. The poem is an English or Shakespearean sonnet with 14 lines comprising 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet. It has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, which Shakespeare strictly maintains. It has a bass meter of iambic pentameter, di-dum, 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 although Shakespeare does vary this rhythm with metrical inversions, which is where, for example, an iamb, di-dum, is effectively flipped to become a trochee, dum-dee, such as in lines 2, 3, 4 and 12. In line 6, 3 iambs, di-dum, 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 are effectively substituted for 2 anapaests, di-di-dum, di-di-dum. Most lines are end-stopped, although caesura and enjambment are also used in places to modulate rhythm and cue a change in stress. The first quatrain begins, My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. It's a striking first line, shocking in its bluntness, as it overturns our expectations in one fell swoop and sets the tone for the rest of the sonnet. In what is effectively an anti-simile, i.e. describing what she absolutely isn't like rather than what she is, Shakespeare uses the word nothing as an adverb to emphatically modify the adjective like, to indicate that his lover's eyes are in no way like the sun. Indeed, in Sonnet 27, he's already described them as raven black. In line 2, he continues to demolish the stereotypes that are the standard fare of love sonnets of the time, as he declares in another anti-simile, "Coral is far more red than her lips red." Coral can refer generally to the marine invertebrates that form reefs in tropical seas, but Shakespeare is probably more narrowly referring to the use of red coral as a precious stone. Note the metrical inversion in the first foot, so that there is a trochee, coral, dumdy, rather than the customary I am, which in putting the emphasis on this word gives it pride of place in the line while the red of his lover's lips is relegated to the end. Note the use of the adverb far to modify the comparative adverb more, which helps to make his dismissal of the comparison definitive. These first two lines are characterised by hyperbole, indicated by the adverbs nothing and far. In rejecting the complementary hyperbole of other sonneteers, Shakespeare has deliberately gone to the other extreme. The first quatrain continues, "If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun." The adjective dun describes a dull greyish-brown colour. So not only is Shakespeare saying that her décolletage is not as white as snow, but he also doesn't even try to make his preferred colour flattering. He doesn't use euphemism either. Where Lynch describes his mistress's ivory front, effectively turning her into an inanimate carving or statue through his unwillingness to refer to anything which sexualises and therefore debases her, Shakespeare refuses to spare his mistress's blushes. She is a sexual being of flesh and blood who has breasts. Note the use of the subjunctive mood of the verb in this line, where he uses be rather than is. The subjunctive mood indicates that what the speaker is saying refers to something that isn't necessarily real, i.e. it is used in hypothetical situations. In this instance, we could argue that that's a bit odd, because snow is generally perceived to be white in colour, i.e. there's no real if about it, and so it's not really hypothetical at all. If you notice, however, he uses the same construction in the next line, which leads us to conclude that he's indicating his awareness of the artifice of these metaphors and the conventions that there are to use them. He seems to be saying, OK, if the expectations are that I describe her in these overblown and impossible terms, I'll play along, but I'm going to compare her truthfully and show you just how ridiculous they are. Note the use of why after the caesura to add emphasis to his response, which is a logical and objective comparison. The first quatrain concludes, "If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head." To our modern ears, this sounds odd, even if we appreciate that it is meant metaphorically rather than literally. In the Elizabethan era, however, wealthy women often wore ornate headdresses that were decorated with fine gold wire, so this would have been an easily comprehended, and flattering, comparison for a blonde-haired woman, and is one, if you remember, that Lynch exploits in his own sonnet. So, in a nod to Lynch, and once again using the if plus subjunctive construction of the previous line, he indicates that this is his own appraisal of the quality of her hair within the terms of reference that have been forced upon him. Note once again the metrical inversion in the third foot of the line which follows a caesura, so that the stress is on the word black to emphasise how her hair is the antithesis of what ideal beauty dictates it should be. You can almost sense Shakespeare's enjoyment at his iconoclastic treatment of the literary blazon here. In the second quatrain, Shakespeare moves on to his mistress's complexion, or the colour of her facial skin. While for Lynch the comparison for his lady's cheeks are the red and white of cherries and milk, for Shakespeare it's another staple of the sonneteer's book of clichés, the rose. He says, "I have seen roses damasked red and white." In other words, he admits that he has indeed seen, in nature, roses which are damasked or variegated, i.e. possessing different colours such as red and white. But he dismisses this comparison out of hand as he asserts that no such roses see I in her cheeks. Note the chiasmus in these lines, where Shakespeare takes the grammar of the first line, i.e. I have seen roses, and inverts it in the second, i.e. no such roses see I, so that the key concepts are repeated but occur in the reverse order. The inversion of the usual I see to see I allows the I to fall on the stressed syllable of the anapaest with the final unstressed syllable of roses see I, diddy-dum. This stress serving to emphasise Shakespeare's assertion that he is not wearing rose-tinted spectacles, even if others are. An appraisal of the fragrance of her breath, or lack of it, concludes the quatrain in lines 7 and 8. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. Of all the comparisons that Shakespeare makes in this poem, this is probably the harshest and most insulting to our ears. The word reeks, in use since the 12th century, has its origins in an Old English verb meaning to give off smoke or vapour. So it is possible that the word did not have the same connotations of giving off a strong or foul odour in the Elizabethan era that it does today, and was just being used by Shakespeare as a synonym for exhales, because it rhymed with cheeks. That being said, dental hygiene did not really exist as a concept in the 16th and 17th centuries. By the time Elizabeth I was in her early 50s, most of her teeth had turned black and fallen out. Once more, Shakespeare is quick to emphasise that his mistress is made of flesh and blood and is at the mercy of her bodily functions, just like the rest of us. Note the use of enjambment at the end of line 7, which accelerates the pace and helps to draw this quatrain to a close. The third quatrain introduces the reader to his mistress's voice and how she moves. It begins, I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. Once more we notice caesura in line 9, creating a pause followed by the coordinating conjunction yet, which indicates that he is about to qualify what appears to be the first complimentary statement of the poem. He seems to be saying that as much as he loves the sound of her voice, it can in no way be described as being as melodic as, for example, the sound of a lute or a harp. Note the use of enjambment once more here, which, in not permitting the reader to pause at the end of the line, instead hurries them along to his assertion in the next of the superior quality of the sound of music. He continues, I grant I never saw a goddess go. Here he admits that he has never seen a goddess move, presumably by gliding or floating, instead asserting that my mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. The matter-of-factness of his description of her lack of gracefulness is the final blow, which destroys any remaining sense of mystique surrounding this woman. He effectively plonks her down firmly on this earth and denies her existence in some heavenly realm where the laws of physics, e.g. gravity, have no jurisdiction. At this point the reader may be thinking, why on earth is he with her if he at best finds her uninspiring and at worst totally repulsive? The final rhyming couplet, signalled by the phrase and yet, is the volta, or the turning point of the poem, where Shakespeare comes to his conclusion, which effectively renders irrelevant all of the less than flattering description of the previous 12 lines. And yet, By heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Even so, he says, the interjection, by heaven, communicating the depth of his sincerity. My love, or my mistress, is as rare, or as extraordinary, as any she, or any other woman, belied by false compare, or misrepresented by false comparison. For Shakespeare, his love for this woman is far more authentic and sincere in its realistic acceptance of her with all her flaws than that of other sonneteers for their mistresses, who will grossly exaggerate a woman's charms to place her on a pedestal of unattainable beauty. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.